What happens when the cleaning lady turns out to be the most powerful person in the company? As a black woman working for years in a major financial firm, she has silently witnessed countless injustices and the toxic culture festering beneath the company's glossy exterior. Tired of the greed and authoritarianism, she decides to take a stand against those in power. When the shareholders' meeting begins, long-hidden truths are revealed, and the balance of power is forever changed. The early morning sunlight streamed through the towering glass windows of Riverstone Company, casting long beams across the gleaming marble floors of the company's sprawling headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia. The building, with its sleek modern design and imposing height, was a symbol of corporate success. Inside, it bustled with energy as employees rushed to their desks, carrying lattes and briefcases, their faces lit by the blue glow of their laptops and smartphones. Among them, unnoticed and unacknowledged, was Amara Johnson. Dressed in a plain blue uniform and pushing a cart loaded with cleaning supplies, she moved silently through the hallways. Her footsteps were soft, her presence quieter still. To the executives and employees hurrying past, she was just the cleaning lady, a shadow on the periphery of their busy lives. But Amara wasn't just a cleaner. At 52, she carried herself with a quiet dignity born of years of perseverance. Her dark brown eyes, framed by fine lines, held a depth that few ever noticed. Her rich, dark skin glowed faintly under the fluorescent lights as she focused on her task, her hands deftly wiping down the large reception desk that greeted visitors at the entrance. Amara had worked at Riverstone Company for 15 years. She knew every corner of the building better than anyone. Every smudge on the glass walls, every creak in the marble floors, and every loose tile that no one bothered to fix. She had seen employees come and go, promotions handed out, and the company's culture evolve, or, more accurately, erode, over time. Despite being invisible to the people around her, Amara was always watching, always listening, and always learning. That morning, as the office buzzed with its usual early week chaos, Amara entered through the side door, as she always did. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the faint tang of office cleaning chemicals. Her cart's wheels squeaked faintly as she pushed it steadily toward the central hallway. A group of executives, huddled near the coffee machine, laughed loudly, their voices echoing through the open space. "She's been here forever," one of them joked, nodding toward the cleaning crew. "Probably knows this place better than anyone." Amara caught the comment but didn't react. She rarely did. Years of similar remarks had taught her that responding wasn't worth the effort. To them, she was furniture, part of the background noise of the office. But that didn't mean she didn't notice. As she moved past the elevators, she saw Elliot Grayson, the CEO of Riverstone Company, stepping out. Elliot was a tall, imposing figure in his early 50s with slicked-back silver hair and a suit that probably cost more than Amara's annual salary. He walked with the confidence of a man who believed the world revolved around him, his sharp green eyes scanning the floor like a predator surveying his domain. "Good morning, Mr. Grayson," one of the younger employees chirped nervously, straightening his tie as the CEO passed. Elliot gave the man a brief nod before his gaze landed on Amara. For a split second, their eyes met, and his lips curled into a barely perceptible smirk, one of faint condescension. Then he turned away, muttering something under his breath about the hallway smelling like bleach. Amara kept moving, her expression calm and unreadable. She was used to this. Riverstone Company prided itself on being one of Atlanta's premier financial firms. The company's glossy marketing campaigns spoke of innovation, teamwork, and a commitment to excellence. Yet Amara had seen the truth behind the facade. She had witnessed the toxic culture that festered beneath the surface, the whispered conversations about layoffs, the forced smiles of overworked employees, and the ruthless competition that rewarded arrogance over competence. The cleaning staff, like Amara, bore the brunt of it. They were often spoken down to, blamed for minor inconveniences, and treated as expendable. Amara remembered the time a junior manager had spilled a cup of coffee in the break room, and then barked at her to clean this mess up. He didn't even bother to apologize or acknowledge her effort afterward. Amara's workday was filled with these moments, small indignities that piled up over the years like invisible weights on her shoulders. Yet, she carried them with grace. Beneath her quiet demeanor was a resilience that had been forged through a lifetime of challenges. What no one knew was that Amara wasn't just a cleaning lady. Hidden behind her unassuming exterior was a secret so significant it could shake the foundations of Riverstone Company. She was the majority shareholder of the company, a position she had inherited after the unexpected passing of her husband, Samuel Johnson, years ago. Samuel had been an early investor in Riverstone Company, long before it became the financial giant it was today. When he passed away, his controlling shares went to Amara, a fact that she had chosen to keep to herself. At first, Amara didn't know what to do with this newfound power. She had been content to let the company run itself while she continued her work in silence. But over the years, as she watched the culture deteriorate and the leadership's arrogance grow unchecked, something began to change within her. She realized that her invisibility gave her a unique vantage point. From the sidelines she could observe everything: the deals made behind closed doors, the whispers of unethical practices, and the casual cruelty of those who thought themselves untouchable. That morning, as Amara polished the chrome door handles of the executive conference room, she overheard a snippet of conversation that stopped her in her tracks. "The shareholders' meeting is next week," one executive said smugly. "Elliot's got it locked down. No one's going to challenge him. The board loves the guy." Amara's hand tightened around the cleaning cloth. They were wrong. For years, she had waited, watched, and planned. And now, as the weight of everything she had endured pressed down on her, she knew the time had come to act. Amara may have been invisible to the people around her, but soon they would have no choice but to see her. Amara worked silently as she polished the massive glass doors of the executive conference room. The morning sun reflected off their surface, casting bright patterns across the lobby floor. Around her, the rhythm of the office continued, a symphony of ringing phones, rapid keystrokes, and hurried footsteps. Yet, none of it registered to her. The snippet of conversation she'd overheard earlier about the shareholders' meeting echoed in her mind. Elliot Grayson, the CEO who thrived on control and intimidation, had grown too comfortable. He believed his position was untouchable, bolstered by a board more interested in profit margins than ethical leadership. Amara had seen it all: the inflated expense reports, the quiet layoffs, and the harassment complaints that were ignored or buried. The toxic culture of Riverstone Company wasn't just an unfortunate byproduct of corporate success, it was deliberate. Elliot had cultivated an environment where employees were too afraid to challenge him. Promotions were handed out not to the most capable but to those who echoed Elliot's arrogance. Mistakes were never owned but instead pinned on the powerless. Amara had witnessed these dynamics for years. She remembered Rachel, a mid-level analyst who had once tried to raise concerns about the unrealistic sales targets imposed by management. Rachel had come to work every day early and stayed late, her reports meticulously prepared. One day Amara found her crying in the break room, her hands trembling as she cradled a steaming cup of coffee. "They're going to fire me," Rachel had whispered, her voice breaking. The next week, Rachel's fears became reality. Her position was eliminated, though Amara overheard two managers joking later about how they had effectively scapegoated her to cover their own failures. Rachel had packed up her desk, her shoulders slumped, while Elliot passed by without even acknowledging her. These were the moments that lingered with Amara. They weren't just stories, they were wounds. One evening, as Amara mopped the marble floors outside Elliot's office, she overheard a different kind of conversation. Two senior managers sat inside, their voices raised as they poured drinks from the minibar Elliot kept stocked. "The layoffs will save us millions," one of them said, his tone dripping with self-satisfaction. "Most of these people don't even matter. Replaceable cogs in the machine." Amara froze, gripping the mop handle tighter. She knew the layoffs would disproportionately target lower-level employees, the receptionists, assistants, and maintenance staff who worked tirelessly to keep the company running. "They'll panic for a few weeks," the other manager laughed. "But who cares? Profits are what matter. Elliot knows that." The words were like a slap in the face. Amara didn't move until the lights in the office turned off and the managers left, their laughter echoing in the empty hallways. That night, she sat at her small kitchen table, staring at a blank sheet of paper. Her modest home, filled with framed photos of her late husband and their two children, had always been a sanctuary, but now it felt like the starting line of a battle she could no longer avoid. She began writing. Amara's plan didn't form overnight. It was a process slow, deliberate, and carefully calculated. She knew the culture at Riverstone Company was designed to silence voices like hers, so she couldn't afford to make a single misstep. The next day, she returned to work with renewed focus. While the employees around her saw her as a passive figure, Amara was anything but. Her years of cleaning had given her access to every room, every hallway, and every conversation in the building. She began piecing together a picture of the company's corruption. Her cart became her cover. Rolling it down the hallways, she made mental notes of discarded memos, overheard meeting snippets, and body language that betrayed hidden stress. One day, as Amara cleaned a conference room after a late-night meeting, she noticed a folder left behind on the table. Its label caught her attention: Employee Optimization Plan. Glancing around to ensure no one was watching, she quickly flipped through the pages. Inside were charts and projections detailing planned layoffs and cost-cutting measures that disproportionately targeted minority and older employees. The rage bubbled beneath her calm exterior, but she kept her face unreadable. She carefully memorized the key points before placing the folder back exactly as she'd found it. Amara wasn't alone in her efforts. Outside the walls of Riverstone Company, she began reaching out to trusted allies. Her first call was to Cheryl Daniels, a lawyer and longtime family friend who had once worked on labor rights cases. Cheryl listened intently as Amara recounted what she'd observed over the years. "Amara," Cheryl said, her voice firm, "what you're describing isn't just unethical, it's illegal. If you're ready to expose them, I'll help you every step of the way." Next, Amara contacted David Ross, a financial analyst who had left Riverstone under suspicious circumstances years earlier. David confirmed her suspicions about the company's practices. "Elliot has always played dirty," he admitted, "but people are too scared to fight him. If you're serious about this, you'll need solid proof." Finally, she reached out to Michael Carter, a journalist for a local newspaper known for exposing corporate corruption. Michael agreed to keep her identity confidential while helping her frame the story for maximum impact. As the days turned into weeks, Amara's plan began to take shape. Every evening, after her shift ended, she returned home to compile her notes, cross-reference documents, and rehearse what she would say when the time came to confront Elliot and the board. Her determination was fueled not only by the injustices she had witnessed, but also by the memory of her husband Samuel. He had believed in the potential of Riverstone Company, investing in it when few others had faith. Amara knew that if he were alive, he would have fought for the same change she was now pursuing. The shareholders' meeting, set for the following week, loomed large on the horizon. Amara knew it would be the culmination of everything she had endured and prepared for. The thought of standing in a room full of powerful executives and exposing their corruption was daunting, but Amara had spent her life building resilience. The time for silence was over. The morning of the shareholders' meeting had arrived, bringing a crisp sense of anticipation to the towering headquarters of Riverstone Company. The grand conference room, perched high above the bustling Atlanta streets, was abuzz with energy. Executives, board members, and key shareholders exchanged handshakes and pleasantries, their voices brimming with confidence. At the head of the polished mahogany table sat Elliot Grayson, radiating his usual air of authority. The room was a showcase of power and privilege. Expensive suits, gold watches, and tailored dresses filled the space, all reflecting the image Elliot had carefully curated for years. To those in attendance, the meeting was a mere formality, a chance to celebrate the company's latest successes and reaffirm Elliot's position as the uncontested leader of Riverstone. Unnoticed among the crowd, Amara Johnson slipped into the room. Her simple yet professional attire, a neatly pressed blazer, and slacks contrasted sharply with the opulence around her. She carried a black leather folder in one hand, her expression calm and unreadable. No one gave her a second glance. To them, she was still invisible. Elliot began the meeting with his usual bravado. Charts and graphs flashed across the massive presentation screen behind him, showcasing record profits and ambitious growth projections. His voice boomed with confidence as he outlined his vision for the company's future. "We've achieved incredible milestones," he declared, his tone triumphant. "And it's all thanks to the leadership, strategy, and decisions that have kept Riverstone at the forefront of the financial world." Polite applause rippled through the room. Elliot leaned back in his chair, his smirk widening as he soaked in the praise. It was then that Amara stepped forward, her voice cutting through the murmurs like a sharp blade. "Excuse me," she said firmly. The room fell silent for a moment before heads turned toward her. There was a beat of confusion, followed quickly by amusement. Elliot raised an eyebrow, his smirk deepening as he recognized her. "Amara, isn't it?" he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "What are you doing here? This meeting isn't for the cleaning staff." A ripple of laughter spread through the room. Some executives exchanged knowing glances, while others outright chuckled. One board member muttered under his breath, "She must be lost." Amara didn't flinch. She stepped closer to the table, her gaze steady as she locked eyes with Elliot. "I'm not here as part of the cleaning staff," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "I'm here as the majority shareholder of this company." The laughter erupted louder this time, unabashed and cruel. Elliot leaned back in his chair, shaking his head as if she had told a particularly ridiculous joke. "The majority shareholder?" he repeated mockingly. "Amara, I don't know what you think you're doing, but this is absurd." More laughter followed, filling the room like a wave. Amara waited patiently, her grip tightening slightly on the leather folder she carried. When the laughter began to die down, she spoke again, her voice unwavering. "You can laugh all you want," she said, her tone steady. "But I can assure you I am not joking." The room quieted, though traces of skepticism and amusement still lingered in the air. Elliot narrowed his eyes, his smirk faltering slightly. "And what exactly is your proof?" he challenged, folding his arms across his chest. Amara set the leather folder down on the table and slowly opened it. Inside was a carefully organized collection of documents, stock certificates, legal filings, and proof of her controlling stake in Riverstone Company. She slid the top sheet across the table toward Elliot, her movements deliberate and precise. "This," she said simply, "is proof." Elliot leaned forward, his brow furrowing as he scanned the document. The room, now completely silent, watched as the color drained from his face. He flipped through the pages, his movements growing increasingly frantic as he realized the truth. This can't be right," he stammered, his voice unsteady. "There's no way." "It's all there, Mr. Grayson," Amara said, her tone calm but firm. "My late husband, Samuel Johnson, was an early investor in this company. When he passed, I inherited his shares. Over the years, I've maintained my stake quietly, observing how this company has been run. And now, as the majority shareholder, I've decided it's time for a change." The shock rippled through the room like a lightning strike. Board members exchanged wide-eyed glances, and a murmur of disbelief spread among the executives. Elliot's hands trembled slightly as he placed the documents back on the table, his bravado completely shattered. This is a mistake," he insisted, though his voice lacked the conviction it once carried. "You've been cleaning floors and emptying trash cans. You can't just walk in here and—" Amara interrupted him, her voice cutting through his protest with quiet authority. "What I've been doing, Mr. Grayson, is watching, listening, taking note of every unethical decision, every abuse of power, and every act of negligence that you and your leadership team have committed. And now, I'm here to hold you accountable." The board members leaned forward, their attention now fully on Amara. One of them, a man with a carefully trimmed beard and a skeptical expression, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Johnson," he began, "if what you're saying is true, then why reveal this now? Why not sooner?" Amara was about to respond when Elliot slammed his fist on the table, his voice rising with desperation. "This is ridiculous," he shouted. "You've been cleaning floors for years, and now you think you can walk in here and take over. This is my company." "It's not your company," Amara countered, her tone steady but sharp. "It belongs to the shareholders. And as the majority shareholder, I have the right to call for your removal." Elliot's face twisted with rage. "You think you can just waltz in here and win a popularity contest with the board? You're delusional. They're not going to side with someone like you." Amara didn't respond immediately. Instead, she opened another section of her folder and revealed the second set of documents, evidence she had painstakingly gathered over months with the help of her allies. These included emails exposing Elliot's involvement in suppressing harassment complaints, internal memos detailing plans to disproportionately lay off minority and older employees, expense reports highlighting Elliot's misuse of company funds for personal luxuries. Amara slid the documents across the table. "I don't need a popularity contest, Mr. Grayson. I have facts. and with these I have the support of the law." She gestured toward Cheryl Daniels, who stood at the back of the room. "This is Cheryl Daniels, a labor attorney who has reviewed every detail of this case. If the board refuses to act, we're prepared to escalate these findings to the appropriate authorities." Elliot's eyes darted between Amara and Cheryl, his confidence crumbling. You wouldn't dare," he muttered. "I would," Amara replied. "And if that's not enough," she nodded toward Michael Carter, who was seated near the door. "I've also spoken to the press. Michael Carter of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution is here today as an observer. If this board chooses to ignore the evidence, the public will know exactly what's been happening behind closed doors." The room erupted into chaos. Board members argued in hushed tones, some furiously scanning the documents, others glaring at Elliot. One of the more senior executives finally raised his hand, calling for silence. "This is serious," he said, his voice grave. "The evidence is clear. We cannot ignore this." Elliot's face turned ashen. "You can't do this," he hissed. "You can't just—" "I already have," Amara said firmly. "Now, let's vote." The vote was tense and contentious, but the outcome was undeniable. By a decisive majority, the board voted to remove Elliot Grayson as CEO. Security escorted him out of the building, his protests echoing down the hallways. The man who had once ruled with arrogance and intimidation was now a shadow of his former self. Amara stood at the head of the table, her shoulders squared and her expression calm. For the first time, the room full of executives looked at her not with disdain, but with awe. She was no longer invisible. The day after Elliot Grayson was escorted out of the building, Riverstone Company was a different place. The news of his dismissal spread like wildfire, rippling through every department and break room. For many, it was a moment of disbelief. The man who had loomed so large over their careers, who had ruled with fear and arrogance, was gone. But for others, especially those who had endured his harshest policies, it was a moment of cautious hope. Amara Johnson returned to the office that morning, not with a cleaning cart, but with a clipboard and a folder filled with plans. She walked through the familiar hallways, her steps measured and confident. Her presence no longer went unnoticed. Employees glanced her way with curiosity, respect, and, for some, a twinge of guilt. She was no longer invisible. The first order of business was to address the staff. Amara called for a company-wide meeting in the Grand Conference Hall. Employees from every level of the organization, assistants, analysts, janitors, and executives filled the room, murmuring quietly among themselves. For many, it was the first time they had ever seen the cleaning lady stand at the front of the room, not as a worker in the shadows, but as their leader. Amara stood at the podium, her voice steady as she began to speak. "I know many of you are wondering why I'm standing here today," she said, her gaze sweeping across the room. "For years I worked among you, cleaning offices, emptying trash cans, and listening. I saw the struggles you faced, the challenges you endured, and the disrespect you tolerated. I know what it feels like to be overlooked, underestimated, and ignored." Her voice grew firmer. "But I also know the strength that each of you carries. This company was built not by one man's ego, but by the hard work of everyone in this room. And it's time we honor that." The room was silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Amara continued, outlining her vision for the company's future. She spoke of transparency, accountability, and fairness. She promised raises for the lowest-paid employees, stricter oversight of executive behavior, and a commitment to fostering a workplace culture where everyone felt valued. The changes began immediately. Amara's first directive was to address the most pressing issues facing the employees who had been ignored for too long. She started by meeting with the cleaning staff, her former colleagues, to hear their concerns and experiences firsthand. One of them, a soft-spoken man named Lewis, shared how he had been reprimanded for taking a sick day without pay. Another, Trina, described how she had worked overtime for years without ever seeing a raise. Amara listened intently, taking notes and promising immediate action. Within a week, the cleaning staff and other support workers saw their wages increased and their benefits improved. Amara also implemented a policy ensuring that no employee would ever be penalized for prioritizing their health or well-being. Next, Amara turned her attention to the company's HR department, which had long been complicit in burying complaints of harassment and discrimination. She brought in an independent third-party watchdog to oversee HR operations and investigate past grievances. For employees who had been silenced, this was a long overdue chance for justice. One former employee, Rachel, the analyst who had been fired unjustly, was invited back for a meeting. Rachel walked into the office cautiously, unsure of what to expect. Amara greeted her warmly and apologized for the way she had been treated. "You didn't deserve what happened to you," Amara said. "I want to make it right. If you're willing, we'd love to have you back and in a role that truly values your skills." Rachel's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. "This means more than you know." Amara also knew that rebuilding trust with the employees required more than policy changes. She began hosting town hall meetings, inviting employees from every department to share their ideas and concerns. These meetings were unlike anything the company had seen before. People who had once been too afraid to speak up now felt empowered to voice their thoughts. At one of these meetings, a young intern named Jordan raised his hand. He was the same intern who had spilled coffee near Elliot's office months earlier, only to watch Amara be blamed for it. "I just wanted to say," Jordan began hesitantly, "that what you're doing here is incredible. You've given us all hope. And I'm sorry for the way I treated you before. I didn't see you for who you really were." Amara smiled warmly. "Thank you, Jordan. But what matters now is how we move forward together." As weeks turned into months, the culture at Riverstone Company began to shift. The changes weren't just structural, they were deeply personal. Managers who had once operated with impunity were held accountable for their actions. Employees who had felt invisible now found their contributions recognized and celebrated. Amara also worked closely with the board of directors to ensure long-term sustainability. She proposed a profit-sharing program that allowed employees at all levels to benefit from the company's success. The board, initially skeptical, eventually saw the value in Amara's vision. "Your husband saw something in this company long before anyone else did," one board member told her during a meeting. "It's clear you have that same foresight." One afternoon, Amara stood in the break room, watching as employees laughed and chatted freely, a stark contrast to the tense atmosphere that had once pervaded the space. Louis, Trina, and Rachel were among them, their smiles genuine. Michael Carter, the journalist who had helped Amara expose the company's corruption, visited her at the office that day. He leaned against the doorframe of her new corner office, a proud grin on his face. "You've done it," he said. "You've turned this place around." Amara shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "We're not finished yet. There's still work to do." Michael chuckled, spoken like a true leader. That evening, as the sun set over Atlanta, Amara stood outside the towering glass building. She looked up at the Riverstone Company logo, her reflection shimmering in the glass. The journey had been long, and the challenges were far from over, but she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. This wasn't just about firing Elliot or exposing corruption. It was about creating a legacy of fairness, integrity, and respect, a company where no one felt invisible. Amara took a deep breath, the cool evening air filling her lungs. Then, with her head held high, she turned and walked away, ready to face whatever came next. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.